Abby Sun, and I'm the conference director. Thank you. And I just want to say a huge thank you. I'm trying to change this up every time. We have an amazing programming team that has been supporting all of these events. We have Megan Mansour here. Lisa, where are you? I saw you like 30 seconds ago. Lisa Valencia Svensson, and then also programming consultant Zainab Guzel, who I think, are you here in the room? Thank you, Zainab. And of course, together we talked to over 100 different filmmakers, filmmaking collectives, and different groups at film festivals all around the world. And it's with all of your help and your thoughts and what you were excited about and what you were challenged by that we have put this program together for you this week. We do want to make sure that you get to experience as much of the program as possible. So just some things that it seems like we need to just keep communicating more and more. So first of all is that every event in this session is being live streamed. Hello to those who are joining us online. And it's available. You can also live stream it. You don't have to come here. We hope that you do, though. But you can watch it on our virtual ticketing platform, Eventive, immediately after every event. There's no upload period. You don't need to wait. For the events that we moved onto Zoom, you can find the links to join those Zooms on the online ticketing platform as well, Eventive. And you can also, we are recording those Zoom webinars. There are some Zoom meetings, the breakout sessions that are not recorded. The ones that are not recorded have a no recording tag on them in the virtual program and in the physical program. And the other ones that are being recorded, we're doing our best to upload them as quickly as possible. And the folks who are doing that are two of my colleagues, Zafrahan Yumru and Keisha Knight, who are not here with us today here at the Democracy Forum because they are in the IDA office in Koreatown using our stable Wi-Fi to host all of those Zoom sessions and upload those recordings for you. So I'm hugely grateful to everybody who has worked on Getting Real, but especially to those folks today. Do I have any other housekeeping? Just check the virtual program. Don't trust anything in the printed program at this point. Just go online. Okay, so we are here to listen to the second of our 4 keynotes for Getting Real 2024. And this one is featuring Jemma Desai, somebody who I have, yeah. I first met Jemma at a time of my life in which I was in transition. I had just left a long-time employer, a film festival that I used to work for, and I attended the Flaherty seminar about a month after all of that went down. And so the Flaherty seminar was the first time that I kind of told people in my industry what had happened to me. And one of the people that I encountered there was Jemma. And from Jemma, we talked, I really feel like in years of intermittent chatting, I'm not trying to presume a closer relationship than what we have, but just in years of correspondence, mostly through social media, what I have found very, very inspiring and interesting about Jemma's work is this ability that she has to navigate through institutions, not being afraid of not succumbing to the fear that comes from wanting to be safe and secure, but instead occupying both an insider and an outside position and moving through institutions and leaving institutions changed in her wake for the better, I hope. I have witnessed institutions that Jemma has worked for uphold a deeper commitment to previously stated values and put money into making those things happen. I also find her endlessly fascinating to listen to, but I'm an American who is just, a total sucker for British accents. Um, and and she's somebody who does things in ways that are not adhering to conventional expectations, whether that is in how she writes, where she publishes her writing. Gemma's most kind of well-known work in the US, I believe, is a self-published Google document named This Work Is Not For Us, which is a really interesting piece of perhaps fitting between the first person diary and research project, an institutional critique as a piece of writing. But she's also done really, really interesting performance lectures. Jemma is a filmmaker herself, live cinema in ways that we might have seen last night, transforming her keynotes into things that are much more vibrant and alive than a mere talk. So with that, thank you so much, Jemma, and we'll welcome you to the stage.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to take a deep breath. Could we get the computer to connect, please? Thank you. So thank you so much for coming today, and thank you to Abby and Megan and everyone at Getting Real and at IDA who have invited me here to speak in front of you at a time where a platform to speak, and to speak honestly with freedom, is not always a given. I want to also thank everyone who were early readers of what I'm about to share with you, who shared notes and thoughts and encouragement. I've learnt so much from all of you, and I'm so grateful for your guidance and your friendship. In the words of Mariam Kaba, everything worthwhile is done with other people. I'm just going to start this. I was invited to speak about anything I wanted, and I was invited, I think, because of my willingness to speak, with feeling and without regard for disciplinary or genre boundaries, on something that Abby was just speaking about the gap between intention and practice, desire and choice that opens out in film and art and also in our lives. Not just in the field of documentary, but some of this work that I've done has been particularly resonant in the field of documentary. I'm really interested in what we become through our practices. And it's in this spirit that I have written and I speak to you today. The form that I'm going to speak to you in carries a hope that my words might help you to connect what you do with something wider than you are paid or hope to be paid to do. I hope it can connect you not just to the sense-making faculties in your heads, but your spirit-making ones. Those in your heart center, your gut, the non-specific location of your soul. So I'm just going to describe myself before we fully begin. I'm an average height brown woman with shoulder-length dark hair, dark eyes, and I'm wearing a black dress and a red shirt, gold jewelry, and a Palestine flag pin. I'm standing on a stage in front of a carousel of images from my Instagram stories, which I shared between October 7th, 2023, when the genocide in Gaza began, until March, when I began writing this keynote. This carousel is an incomplete archive of images and ideas that have pushed against me. They've changed me, even if my resharing of them has not resolved the conditions that they describe. The carousel does not contain images and content that have not been able to make sense of, that have made sharing more difficult. Ones where my receipt and role in receiving has been less easy and less open. Images of bodies, emaciated, flattened, dismembered, forgotten, tortured, strewn, scooped up with hands into plastic bags, gathered into shrouds and embraced, tended to, or still buried deep within rubble. There are no white phosphorus burns in this carousel, which cause cylindrical spaces inside bodies where there was once flesh. There is no record here telling us where those chunks of flesh go. There is nothing testifying to the possibility of a threefold increase in the official death toll recorded in Palestine, as the means for accounting for life is still rooted in the terms of an old world, where the dead are identifiable and identified by those who knew them. Doctors on the ground say they estimate only a third of deaths occur in this way. Another third are destroyed in unrecognizable ways, and another third are buried under the rubble of what once was. These images I describe and are not pictured behind me have forced their way into every task that I have done in the last 6 months. They have shaped the way that I have written, the ways that I have mothered, the ways that I have shown up for and made sense of the world, and the relationships, attachments, and structures that hold it and me together. As everything has fallen apart, I have never been less sure of the whole and more sure of Frantz Fanon's words, decolonization never takes place unnoticed, for it influences individuals and modifies them fundamentally. The gap between what I have seen and what I have shared testifies in some ways to the ways that I, as a cultural worker, safe from the sharp end of present-day settler colonial violence, am immersed in a materiality that cannot let in the full realness of this moment. As Eve Tuck and Wayne Yang write in their 2012 essay, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, there are parts of the decolonization project that are not easily absorbed by human rights or civil rights-based approaches to educational equity. Approaches which structure the ethical framework of so much of the work of formalized cultural production and theorizing, of which this talk is inevitably a part. Part of this flawed framework pushes back against the reality of resistance, pushes back at attempts to grapple with what Steve Salater has called a practical appraisal of violence. I have been invited here to speak on a stage that makes theorizing easy and reality abstracted. No one asked me to speak on Palestine here, and I am doubtful of what my speaking can do, for what end. But I have chosen to speak about integrity, and so I cannot speak about anything but Palestine. Integrity has 3 meanings. One pertains to honesty, the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. The second is one of being unbroken, the state of being whole and undivided. The third is the condition of many parts together being in synthesis, to be unified and sound in construction. In the last few months, more than ever, it is clear how little integrity in any sense of the word the documentary or any creative field can claim in its current infrastructures. As I sat down to think through this invitation, I returned, as I often do, to the work of Sonia Childress, who is maybe here today, I hope that she is, whose writing, leadership, and practical advocacy in the field of documentary will be known to many of you in this room. As I read her piece, A Reckoning from 2020, I was struck by the continued resonance of the questions that she posed to the field. Who do we want to be? What future are we creating? And what structures must fall in order to build a new foundation? In her piece, she presents 3 points of contention in the documentary field, but these are also 3 points of contention in being in the world: authorship, accountability, and ownership. And I want to bring these 3 points in at the beginning of this talk as I stand here on this platform with freedom to use my voice as a non-Palestinian, as a non-American, and a holder of a British passport. I stand here as a product of British colonialism. My family history encompasses the complications of this ancestral history: marginalization, racialization, but also implication in the political ideology of Hindutva, which, like Zionism, roots its aims in resettlement, reoccupation, and re-inhabitation that furthers settler colonialism. With this history at my back, if I pay close attention to everything that I can feel at the center of my being, I can feel the imprint of a heel on my face, even as I am aware of my own being pressed on the face of another. Considering these differences and positionalities is an ethical framework a filmmaker, producer, or a writer might consider when deciding how to tell a story or to make a film, or a programmer or critic might employ to assess a completed piece of work. But really, they are spiritual questions concerned with the very foundations of our beings. A framework for making that should map into our living. Or as science fiction writer Ursula K. Guin put it, you cannot buy the revolution, you cannot make the revolution, you can only be the revolution. It is in your spirit, or it is nowhere. When I read Sonia's A Reckoning now, its ideas start to connect in my mind with Tuck and Wang's ethical framework of incommensurability. Put simply, this idea helps us to put words to something many of us have felt, that what we have all witnessed in the last 6 months has underlined something we already knew and now can no longer ignore. That the tools and systems we have to organize ourselves, our work, and our desires are aligned with and implicated in systems of power that are complicit in this genocide, even if we vow that we and our work is not. As these systems violently reassert themselves, even as the bloody violence that props them up is revealed and disavowed again and again, many of us wonder if our ongoing political commitments could ever align with the current ways that we are permitted and permit ourselves to make. During this time, it has been hard to not collapse into the jaws of nihilism, to feel that nothing matters. Or it has been easy to fall prey to busy work, to organize around the existing architecture of spectacle in which our work sits, to insist on their possibilities, even as time and again we are shown that what happens on stages, screens, and spaces we have dedicated ourselves to creating cannot affirm the life that we seek to affirm. All the while, integrity or the search for it in itself becomes a privilege, another measure by which to dehumanize others. These others are not those who refuse it, which would be accountability, but are those to whom it is refused, the ultimate abstracted evasion. In the words of Mohammed El-Kurd, distracting questions in our field about open letters, who has or will sign them, where history must begin, who wears a pin to the awards, who boycotts, who does not, who uses their platform to speak, feed the discursive loop that prioritizes a conjectural day after over the material present. But here in the present, he writes, there are more pressing questions. What are the mental and muscular consequences of being forced to transform a taxi into a hearse? What becomes of the nurse whose shift is interrupted by the arrival of her husband's corpse on a stretcher? What about the father carrying what remains of his son in 2 separate plastic bags? What happens to him after all of this death, once he is alone and away from the cameras? What kind of man will the boy carrying his brother's limbs in a bag grow up to be? Or as he wrote in poetry in 2021, I've been meaning to eat today, but I spent 1,000 mornings since sunrise insisting upon my integrity. What El-Kurd witnesses for himself and his people is that what we are constituted of is not what the nation state and its structures of knowing says is real, but from the knowledge production of our spirits and what we feel to be real. We are our perceptions, our senses, our sense-making, which happens through our bodies and through our experience of the world and of each other. We are all, filmmakers or not, film industry or not, implicated in making the real for each other. This reality shaping should know no borders. It should be a given. Yet here we are today, people usually active in constructing the narrative of the real, reduced to passively watching a live stream genocide unfold on screens we have had no hand in mediating. How do we contend with questions of authorship, accountability, and ownership in this kind of documentary reality? What, if anything, do our practices in image making and circulation reveal about the currency of images at this time? As image makers concerned with violence or its causes, filmmakers might be practiced in carefully organizing the image, situating it around their vision, the dignity of its central concern, or the film's purpose in the world. As a programmer, I am interested in the possibility of image to create an immediacy of embodied feeling. As a writer and somatic facilitator, I am interested too in the language that organizes that feeling. As a facilitator, I invite people to purposefully organize themselves in height, width, and depth, past, present, and future, dignity, belonging, and safety, around what they care about. To have this inform and fill out their psychobiology, which forms their sense of reality. Part of this is rooted in sensation, but part of it is inevitably in language. At a time of not just endless image circulation, but endless statement making and liberal equivocation that continuously changes the points at which the real is constituted, it is hard to believe in the vitality of language. Perhaps the thing that has killed language at this moment is its mobilization in the project of linearity, the constant reliance on meaning making through that which is countable and measurable. In this is the denial of simultaneity, of the temporal, sensorial, and embodied dimensions in which language exists. This is the space where the image re-enters. In recovery, therapists often speak of playing the tape all the way through to keep us attached to being accountable to our actions and choices. I wonder what the tape will show when the statements we have signed in these past months are found in the archives. Will it show we organized around the center and dignity of our creative instincts, what we knew deep down to be true about how inherited narratives can be constructed and remade for new ends, or around an old concession which we were told was reasonable? During these months of letter signing, I wonder if the souls of those of us convinced we are concerned with the real will survive our need to concern ourselves with the fiction of the nation state, having become embroiled, sometimes against our better judgment, in the performance of condemning, conceding, appeasing, in the hope of mobilizing across difference. In this compromised hope, have we forgotten the determination of form? Formal choices in our filmmaking are intentional. We take difference seriously when we make formal choices. Those who make work that pushes against established norms know that flattening the form of our making flattens what can be said, even if it means it can be said to more people. So how can we take form seriously when we assemble our demands as artists and filmmakers against genocide that needs all of us to resist? In the context of statement making, what are the effects of hard lines between effect, integrity, neutrality, partiality? How do they manufacture denial where there is none, generate fear from collective courage, and collapse to the idea that violence emerges from a vacuum of reasonableness, not the violent, everyday suppression of ordinary life? In her 1986 essay, The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, Ursula K. Le Guin reshapes the narrative of utility, telling us the first tool was in fact the basket rather than the spear. We were gatherers before we were dominators. Before we were heroes or perpetrators searching for victims, we were in fact recipients, two hands cupped together to hold, a mouth open to receive and to share. A story can be a spear, Le Guin teaches us, or it can be a receptacle. If we use the point of a story to wound or to draw the blood of attention, that is one way. But we can use a story to gather, to assemble, to rouse, and to soothe. I think of this distinction when 10 programmers at Hot Docs release a statement about their resignations, which they end by saying, "Films are the penicillin to what ails the world, because they hold the mirror up to our shared experience. Fiction lets you escape, documentary confronts. We can't dream, change, or do better until we see who we are." I think about this sureness in the distinction of the work that is done in the field of documentary. What is more truthful about the building of a narrative when we want to confront than when we want to escape? What more does it allow us to see about ourselves? What if the two were more close together than we might let ourselves imagine? Journalists from Gaza filming from within their experiences have generated a reality that Western media would dismiss as partisan. Truths that feel as if they should be fiction and conjured poetry from the deep well of knowing that their experiences contain. There is nothing I have seen that is more spiritually true than the image of a man cradling his dead grandchild and speaking to her as if she were alive, gently telling her, "You are alive and as beautiful as the moon. You are the soul of my soul." Nothing has more challenged the reality formed through the effective distance of Western journalism and its form of the real, of truth itself, than this image of a man's tender, poetic attempt at the retrieval of the impossible to retrieve. In this attempt at poetic fiction, he recovers for himself a documentary humanity from those that would and have taken it from him and others like him. If testimony and poetry live so closely in order to defend life where there is so much violence, then what use is the distinction between them anymore? In his speech from 1962 called The Artist's Search for Integrity, James Baldwin begins with the introduction of the idea that the integrity of an artist is an analogue for the integrity of aliveness, of being human. In it, he reclaims the utility of language and story as a guide for practice, even as he affirms their emptiness as simple theory. I'm going to quote his words here at length. He says, "I really don't like words like artist or integrity or courage or nobility. I have a kind of distrust of all these words because I don't really know what they mean, any more than I really know what such words as democracy or peace-loving or warlike or integration mean. And yet one is compelled to recognize that all these imprecise words are attempts made by us all to get to something which is real and which lives behind the words. Whether I like it or not, for example, and no matter what I call myself, I suppose the only word for me when the chips are down is that I am an artist. There is such a thing. There is such a thing as integrity. Some people are noble. There is such a thing as courage. The terrible thing is that the reality behind these words depends ultimately on what the human being, meaning every single one of us, believes to be real. The terrible thing is that the reality behind all these words depends on choices one has to make forever and ever and ever, every day. The intentional practice of choice is the first thing we disavow when we give up our integrity. Choice disappears, or at least seems to, when we are constricted, or when old choices are no longer available, or when scarcity becomes a predominant narrative, when our work becomes what Audre Lorde termed a travesty of necessities, and not a means to affirm life. This distinction between ascetic necessity and abundant affirmation in our field is presented as an issue of scarce resources and plentiful risk. But what if this distinction were an intentional act of warfare on our imaginations, repackaged as necessary collateral damage? What I mean is, if, as is often said, that Palestine is really freeing us, then how do we articulate that process in the now, in the context in which we work? Or as Gargi Bhattacharya, a scholar of racial capitalism who has also written about political heartbreak, writes, Palestinians in their liberation struggle reveal the fictions of our freedom, the reach of occupation, and the forces that further that occupation. When I extend her words, I understand that what they mean for me, for us, is that the limits of our ability to engage with the issue of Palestine, embroiled as it is in an intersection of violences, from settler colonialism to imperialism to state violence to racism, labor struggles, and more, is a litmus test for the limits of our desires for the transformation of our conditions, working and living, shared and distinct, always interdependent. There is a spectrum of freedom that the issue of Palestine reveals, which raises questions of narrative directly relevant to the role of documentary and what it might do. The building of narrative is a series of choices, and these choices form and are formed from our integrity, what we believe to be real. Do we believe in the confronting, unsettling truth and dignity of human resistance as a form of aliveness, or the more respectable, comforting fiction of human resilience with neatly hidden scars? Decolonial theorists teach us about imperial power's force on the very conception of the human, that the intersections of race, location, and time together inform what it means to exist. As we make sense of this moment and it transmutes into another, what films will be commissioned and platformed and deemed acceptable? What truth will be allowed to be confronted, and which fiction will we escape into? In the realm of documentary, how will we shape together what we all collectively believe to be real? What projection of humanity will emerge from this belief? Like the caregiver of a small child or anyone who we are in a relationship of care with, filmmakers, writers, programmers, distributors, audiences are in the business of validating the real in some way. By the act of witnessing a story, a subject, we enter into a relationship that might avow or disavow someone's realness. The belief in being real and the power to confer that to others is a gesture of shared humanity. Taking it away from someone is an act of profound soul loss. Who can forget the TikToks of Israeli occupation force soldiers with their trophies looted from Palestinian homes, of young Israeli women donning comical makeup to mock Palestinian suffering? Who can forget the children rounded up outside Al-Shifa Hospital, later to be razed to the ground amongst a litany of war crimes, to take part in a press conference, to declare their humanity, not in their mother tongue, but that of their original colonizers, mobilizing an English translation that might somehow render them human enough to live? These are all formal choices rooted in a belief in the real. At a conference called Getting Real, in a field like documentary, which seeks to define itself, if not completely distinct, but in some way distinct from fiction, it feels important to think about the role of form as it shapes our belief in reality. About how our attachments to fictions grow appendages, infrastructures, and systems of rules, which in turn become recognized as regulating our actions and are enforced by the imposition of relational penalties. This, in turn, becomes what we are told we must accept as real. Documentary cinema and its effects are made up of more than the people inside them. They are made up also of a series of possibilities, which are also built by material and ephemeral and sensorial constraints. How much money, how many people, but also how much light, how much motion, space, time, and sound will we choose? In what form? To what emotional end? Similarly, the spaces in which we gather to share this work, Getting Real being one itself, are built on similar constraints, towards certain aims. As we sit here, the background hum of inequitable labour conditions on which our work rests has formed quite clearly our experience of our gathering, yet still more is undoubtedly hidden from view. We have all been witnesses in recent months to the apolitical fantasies retained by film festivals founded on geopolitical manoeuvres, military-backed showcases repackaged as platforms for the benevolent gift of dissent and free speech. Many of us claim these spaces for gathering and joy while retaining the colonial imperialist language of their administration and allure, without fully reckoning with the forfeit of this exchange. What is lost to the most fundamental element of human connection, relation, when we exploit, submit to, and asymmetrically award according to the inherited logics of such structures? Are we happy with this business as usual? What I am drawing attention to is not new. Many in the field are drawing attention to the asymmetries in the field, in the ways that we make and circulate work, and how that stops us from building coalitions and building infrastructures of freedom. The autonomous withdrawal of films from IDFA, a collective of workers organising around the desire to let go of the fests, the invitation to strike Germany, are all examples of a movement beyond distance critique or reformist protection of existing spaces towards an active, practice-led questioning of all our roles in upholding these systems. Reflecting on Getting Real in 2018, Sonia Childress wrote about the practical work of this kind of questioning that leads to material organising. I'm going to quote her at length here. "Make no mistake," she writes, "coalition building is organising even spiritual work. It is labour that demands honest conversations about perspective, identity, history, and power. We must have the courage to confront this pain, to uproot the patterns of assimilation and competition that keep all our communities on the margins. By mining these sensitive areas, coming into closer proximity to collective pain, we can then move into collective healing and joy. We can begin to envision and build a new creative landscape that sees and reflects all of us truly. What does it mean to choose truth at a time where it seems we are being told constantly that there is no choice and that everything is lies? When the invisible choices we have made for so long have become faster than thought, so they are buried deep in our passive actions or inaction, buried deep in the gestures we make or do not make. How much of the world is let through the scrutiny of a commissioner, programmer, or distributor? How much can the steadfast determination of a producer hold? How do we gather these elements in the assemblage of a final product? Finally, how do we hide the process of that assemblage? Hide that the process is rooted in relation, and that this relation happens not only in a system of sentimentalized collaboration, but also in a system of power, deference, and appeasement. What room is there to choose differently? What space is there to witness a new possibility? Early on in November, as winter set in, I spent weeks obsessively thinking and dreaming about constriction and enclosure, about people trapped in buildings, under rubble, of words stuffed down throats, eyes averted, and connections strained. This suffocation was both real and imagined, a sensorial reaction to what I had witnessed from afar and its effects, or lack of, on those around me. I was reminded of this claustrophobia recently as a video circulated of a 7-year-old boy who remained under the rubble for 9 days. Already starving, his tiny body was almost all bones, yet he was retrieved, still alive. The video was shared to affirm the truth of life in the midst of the truth of genocide. "I see no one sharing," the tweet said. "If he were dead, everyone would share." I watched this video and thought of all the will to live, the child, the hands around him that constituted the reality and the image I received. I thought back to Simone Lee's Black feminist convening in the summer of 2022, called The Loophole of a Retreat. The loophole is a conceptual framework borrowed from Harriet Jacobs, a formerly enslaved woman who for 7 years after her escape lived in a crawl space she described as a loophole of a retreat. Jacobs claimed this site as simultaneously an enclosure and a space for enacting practices of freedom, practices of thinking, planning, writing, and imagining new forms of freedom. Or, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore tells us, where life is precious, life is precious. I wonder how we can find loopholes in the smallest spaces that no one can see, in the cracks and fissures. How can we not misrecognize them in the wide open spaces we already know and have seen generate only partial freedom from infrastructures that we have inherited, not chosen or made? If we find them, how will we help each other extend into them, develop new practices of thinking, planning, and imagining new forms of freedom? How will we not give up on the precious life that is possible from these fissures? I do not know where the places we have been in the last 6 months will take us. What I do know is that we are all in this room in some way part of rendering life precious, revealing the places that it is not, and being honest about how we are all implicated in this asymmetry. Part of the integrity of this honesty is to be true witnesses to the landscape of what we have now, and how much space there is for us to practice towards the future we desire. How can we be with what is real in the present moment and not move immediately to wanting to be the architects of something that smooths over that realness, which implicates all of us? What new forms will we need to practice towards something other than moderating reality? What life-affirming desire will we need to feed, to nurture, in order to not just demand, but to have more? Which desires will we need to give up to make life truly precious? How can we help each other to ask for what we need? In the words of Diane de Prima, if what you want is jobs for everyone, you are still the enemy. You have not thought through clearly what that means. If you want degrees from universities, which are nothing more than slum landlords, festering sinks of lies, so you too can go forth and lie to others on some greeny campus, then you are still the enemy. You are selling yourself short. Remember, you can have what you ask for. Ask for everything. Thank you.